Welcome everyone. This is another webinar organized by the Brunel Academic Education Network. We have the pleasure to host today Ms. Zoe Tompkins and Dr. Magnus Ramage from the School of Computing and Communications at the Open University. They're going to do a talk on decolonising STEM, and they're going to present to us insights and evidence from a few projects that they've been working on at the Open University. Over to you, Zoe and Magnus. You may start your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, just hello everybody. I'm Zoe Tompkins. I'm a lecturer in the School of Computing Communications, and very delighted to be here today to share, as the title says, some reflections and some insights from the projects that we've been working on for the last few years.
And I'm Magnus Ramage. I'm a senior lecturer in information systems in computing and communications.
Okay.
So we're going to talk three main areas. A brief introduction to the OU for people who don't know the institution, to just give you a sense of the distinctiveness of our university and why that is significant in this matter. Second, why it's important to consider the decolonising of the STEM curriculum. Our personal experience, most of it is in computing and IT, but some of the work that we're touching on, we hope is all relevant to other STEM disciplines, and some of the work is explicitly drawing on other STEM disciplines. And then the bulk of our time is talking about three projects that we conducted between us. And if we have time at the end, we'll have sort of a relatively, well, we might have some thoughts about takeaways and have some space for people to have their own thoughts as well. Next one, please. So lots of people in the room may know the Open University or may know some about it, but a very brief introduction to what makes us distinctive. We were formed in 1969. Our pioneer, our founding mother, as we like to say, was Jenny Lee, who's the person in the picture, who was Minister of Arts in the Harold Wilson government of the 1960s. We have since 1969 worked on the same mission, being open to people, places, methods, and ideas. And we're very proud of our identity as a Four Nations university. We have students, we have staff across the whole of the UK and Ireland too, actually, both Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. It's significant that we're big. We have in the past, in our history, taught over 2 million students from very diverse backgrounds. We have no entry requirements as a university. Well, we have no entry requirements for our core undergraduate provision. Postgrad modules and apprenticeships and the like are different. But for the core undergraduate offer, no entry requirements, and we focus on a model of supported open learning. Next one, please. A few stats which might be relevant to sort of get a sense of our rough size. Currently, we have about 135,000 students of actual people, and roughly, because most of our students are part-time, that's roughly 75,000 full-time equivalent. We have a lot of students who have declared a disability. Zoe pointed out to me we needed to phrase it this way, because we have 30% of students we know have told us that. There is a strong likelihood we have a lot more students who haven't told us that as well. And there's a whole variety of disabilities, but particularly issues around mental health, neurodiversity, and lower down a whole bunch of physical disabilities. But we like to say sometimes we have more students with disabilities than many universities have students, full stop. Most of our students are in work. 70% are working while studying. The typical OU student historically has been somebody between about 25 and 45. That is changing. Our demographic is skewing younger. Most in recent years, we've had like a third of our new undergraduates under 25. And the proportion of, we have a remarkably high, so I said we have no formal entry requirements. Inevitably, lots of our students do have past qualifications, but at least a third of our students have no more than one A level when they come to study with us. And about a quarter of our students are living in the quarter most deprived areas with the index of multiple deprivations in the UK. I mean, that's an exact mapping, but it shows that we are reaching people coming from very deprived areas. So that's the sort of, the other thing, I couldn't get figures that I was allowed. I have a lot of figures about the demographics of the OU, but I couldn't work out which ones it was okay to share. But I can say informally that our ethnic mix, which is relevant to this topic, our ethnic mix of students is roughly in line with the census figures. So we have about 20% of people from racially minoritized backgrounds, which is approximately the same as the census data for England and Wales. I think we could go on to the next one, please.
Okay, that's over to me then. Yeah. Thanks, Agnes, for that, setting the scene for what the OU is about. We're big. I think that's what that says, one thing, and we have a diverse student population, which brings lots of interesting opportunities for our students. And yeah, the mission really strong about being open to all. Okay, so why decolonising the STEM curriculum matters, why it matters to us. But first, where to start? So you could say that for far too long, we've had a Eurocentric dominance of what and how we teach. And this has been very much at the expense of those on the edge and those on the peripheral. And therefore, decolonisation of academia does present us an opportunity to challenge the UK higher education sector, to disrupt those traditional knowledge sources through creating a space for those who have been on the edge, for those who've been marginalised. Yet, why aren't more of the universities doing this? Only 20% of UK universities claim to be decolonising themselves. And those efforts tend to be in the social sciences. So STEM, science, tech, engineering, maths, seems to be still entangled with the fact that it's science, it's based on facts, and these legacies of colonialism, therefore, very strong. And anyway, what does decolonising mean and what does it imply? And so hopefully through this session that we have with you today, you may have some more thoughts on that, and certainly something we can bring into the discussion at the end. Okay, so you can't have really a conversation about decolonising the computing curriculum without thinking about the persistence of the sector and the awarding gap challenge that we face within the higher education sector. And we know it's persistent because I can't grasp, a bit small for me, but I think in 2010 it was about 17%. And when we last had the measure back in 2024, yes, it has narrowly closed to 13%, but still 13% means that white students are more likely to gain a first or a higher upper second, a 2-1. And unfortunately for us, in computing and engineering, we have some of the largest widening gaps, around the 15% mark. Already mentioned about the fact that there's an uneven decolonisation focus. So the arts and humanities seem to be where the work is being done, or certainly talked about the most, versus STEM, and in particular within computing, which is where Magnus and myself, are based. And acknowledgement that our curriculum is very Eurocentric. So with no apologies here, but it's the white, pale, male, stale focus that seems to dominate a lot of the teaching and learning content that we see. And as a result, our students are telling us that they don't feel like they belong and they don't have representation. They don't see themselves within our teaching profile, within the resources that they are using and engaging with. And therefore, they are feeling a disconnect. And this is something that we should be doing something positively about, given our mission of being open to all and being inclusive. Okay, so if you are wanting to step into the world of doing decolonising work, what does that mean? What do you have to do? How do you adopt a decolonial computing perspective? And therefore, how do we move from having a discussion to actually change, and then translate that into a challenge to our culture, to our structures, to our strategy, and to embed long-term change as well? I suppose very simply, you have got to start speaking out. So it's great that we're here at this event because it gives us a space to acknowledge some of the challenges that we have, some of the problems, and gives a spotlight on what decolonising is about. But personally, you also have to take a decolonial computing perspective. So think about the geopolitical, the geography, the economics, the demographics, all intertwined with the politics, and how physical features influence political activity and the use of power. And computing is a tricky area for such work. We believe very strongly that computing needs to be viewed as a social technical field, and therefore as a starting point, as university educators, we are either consciously or unconsciously adopting the Eurocentric perspective in the production of knowledge and teaching content. And so we are complicit through our educational institutions because we do perpetuate this Western dominance, and therefore the exclusion from those that are already marginalised. Note that's a call out there to you, Mustafa, in terms of a credit on that slide. Okay, so I've often been asked at various events that I've been to about what does decolonising computing mean? And yeah, I do every time give a different answer. And so from my perspective, I've decided there isn't a definition and there is no universal template. But we do need to try and set the scene a little bit. And often, if you read papers on this, 2015, Roads Must Fall, which was in the University of Cape Town in South Africa, and then it moved to Oxford University here in the UK, with the demand by students to remove the statue of Cecil Rhodes, who was a white supremacist. So that's often kind of seen as a starting point. And it should have been, and perhaps it is, I'm not sure, one of the most important conversations in universities today, because we know that they are built on the power and privilege of the dominant white at the expense of others. And that money came from colonial plunder. So it's really imperative that for those of us who are wanting to adopt a decolonial computing perspective, consider our own identities. Sometimes this is called positionality. That seems to be quite an in-flavour word at the moment. But, we've got our biases. We have the norms that we've learned from our childhood, from our relationships and so forth. But we need to consider those and take them forward in terms of how we create curricula and how we develop our understanding of how this impacts our students' learning experiences and how we need to adopt, how we need to change. So the decolonial turn that's mentioned here on the left of the slide is open to individual interpretation. Could be seen as being radical, or it could be seen as simply, you know, think about what and how we teach, and therefore we should try to work towards a shared view of coloniality as being an ongoing challenge. I mentioned already about taking a social technical perspective. So the decolonial option is very ethical based, creating space, again, something I've already mentioned in terms of thinking about non-dominant forms of knowledge. And this is something we've done in the projects going forward, which we're going to talk about, and trying to dismantle those dominant sources of power and control. Okay, so just to take this from another angle, sometimes images become very powerful, and you need to start looking at some everyday examples, and you start questioning sources of material and saying, do they represent everybody? So these photos here, face recognition software, you might have seen these before. UK passport checker, the woman on the left, the darker skin, more likely to be told their photos fail UK passport rules and be rejected. And on the right-hand side here, the man from New Zealand was trying to also obtain a passport, had their photo turned down because his eyes were assessed as being closed. We've got all of these on our phones. You may have already used some today. Maybe you're sending a sad face because you're sat in this presentation, or one that's laughing with joy, I don't know. But these were the original set of emojis. They were very based on a white image. This is Unicode 7.0. They only had 2 ethnic characters, as you see here under A and B. So they represented everybody else who wasn't white. Although today, obviously, we have much more contemporary representation. This was really, you know, color blind racism, a brilliant example of that. And then the third example, in terms of how we can trace the global life cycle of your laptop, of your mobile phone, from the material origins in the rare earth elements, you know, in Africa and South America, all the way through to the manufacture and assembly in China, and then back again across the seas, across the oceans, back to the west, and then they go back with all the waste to these countries. So 90% of waste transported to Ghana is lead, dioxins, carcinogenics. It goes into landfill, contaminates the water. You know, children, young people are melting this down to extract components that have value. Smoke from the open fires. You know, 250,000 tons of waste per year is transported to Ghana and dumped into landfill. I mean, it's really quite shocking. Okay. The next bit of our session is all around the projects. So we've got 3 projects that we're going to talk about. And this first one is one that I worked with Magnus and the staff were on. So I'm going to hand this over to you, Magnus, to talk about this project number 1.
Thanks, Zoe. We're not going to spend tons of time talking about this project. Can you just go back just a moment to the previous slide with the title, please?
Sorry.
So the project was called Decolonising Computing, a Resource for Educators. The goal was to have it, to look at what resources that we needed to create to enable our colleagues in computing and communications in the first place, to have resources that would enable them, to enable us to have a decolonial approach of the sort that Zoe has talked about within our education, within our curriculum, within our pedagogy, and so on. We did some of that. It was somewhat partial success. But one of the things that was most concrete that we do want to talk about a little bit was a survey that we constructed. So now if you go back again, please, Zoe, thanks. The the thing I do want to say about the project actually is Mustafa Ali was the project lead. It was funded through our scholarship centre in STEM subjects at the OU. And I wanted to, I don't think we've put it in but I wanted to put in the chat a link to a really helpful paper that Mustafa wrote about 10 years ago now, a brief introduction to decolonial computing that was very much at the foundation of the ideas within this project and then has then sort of laid into all of the other work. So as part of this project, we wanted to know what our students thought. So we asked them. We were able to, as we previously said, the OU is big. We were, roughly speaking, we have like 6,500, 7,000 students on our undergraduate modules within computing and communications. We were permitted to invite, with the rules of survey work at the OU with students, we were permitted to send out an invite to just over 3,500 of those. And we got a roughly 10% response rate. So we got 399 responses about a set of questions about students' experience of decolonising computing. Zoe and I have written this up in a couple of papers, which are in the reference section at the end of the talk. And with another colleague as well in one case. And there were a bunch of quantitative questions which were based on an instrument by a couple of people who were at the University of Kent, Dave Thomas and Catherine Quinlan. But the most interesting thing I think was the free text question about what did we think students understood by decolonising computing. So we did a thematic analysis on that, and that produced 7 broad themes. One was around history, and understanding. There's sort of 2 ways of taking it. So some people said that it would be by introducing a decolonising approach, that would be to whitewash history. It would be to take out some of the history from the discipline. Other people, almost exactly the same theme, but almost exactly the opposite perspective, suggesting that it would be to enhance the history, to get you a richer understanding and a more broad understanding. Some people talked about the having a more global perspective, taking away the focus from a European or colonial viewpoint. Quite a lot of people, as I remember, talked about removing privilege or removing bias by introducing a wider and more diverse demographic. There were a bunch of things that were said that broadly would be considered inclusivity. We're not in this talk going to get into the difference between decolonising and EDI approaches, but in our various work, we've talked about this at some length. But directly inclusive and diverse ideas. There were some people who simply said decolonising computing is the same as this sort of 1950s, 1960s approach to decolonisation of nations, so giving up colonial control, and others who then took a broader perspective of making changes at an institutional level. And finally, there is the sort of thing that was implied a little bit when Zoe was talking about the whole Cecil Rhodes stuff of the removal of colonial influence from our educational materials. Next one, please. I'm not going to talk about lots of the details on this. But there was a perspective that we increasingly came to, that a lot of our curricula were Western, were Eurocentric, potentially US-centric, both in terms of particular concepts like ubiquitous computing, and of, as is the case with other disciplines, with the reading lists that we have. There's a bunch of socio-technical issues that arose within our pedagogy, our learning design. I won't talk about the making a cup of tea example, but there is the perception that you can simply use how do you make a cup of tea as a neutral idea, and it turns out, without very much unpacking, that it's nothing but it's anything but neutral. There are a bunch of language issues that keep arising, that specific to the computing curriculum, where practitioners will have for a very long time talked about master devices and slave devices, or in cybersecurity talk about black hat and white hat, and really, really problematic terms, which, to be fair, are gradually going out of fashion because they're understood by practitioners to be problematic. But then there's the question of how do you teach those? Do you just say this is totally inappropriate language, or do you say, well, this is terrible language, but you might experience it, and so you have to be ready for that. And outside of the scope of our work, but important in the Open University's response to this, has been an initiative that we've developed. We haven't developed, colleagues of ours have developed, called the Inclusive Curriculum Tool, which enables a strong look at our curriculum in terms of its diversity and inclusion in a bunch of different ways. I think that's all I want to say, or I think it's all I've got time to say about this first project. Zoe?
Yeah. Okay, I am going to have to speed up.
Sorry.
No, don't worry. Not at all. It's all important stuff. So, second project then. The aim of this research was to discover what activity is currently underway within the discipline of computing, which naturally sits within STEM. So what does it look like? And we actually called it mapping the terrain. And we wanted to showcase via this comprehensive audit the current range of decolonising computing activities underway within the UK higher education institutions, so HEIs. And really the idea of this was we wanted to then build awareness in our own STEM community of how to decolonise through real examples that are already happening in the sector. And hoping that seeing this transformation that was going on, it would be a real call to social justice and, would lead to a reimagined curriculum, which does ultimately represent all voices and knowledge production. So that was our kind of ambition. So where did we look? So we actually looked at over 40 HEIs. Our original list was expanded from just the Russell Group to include the Athena, Swan, Gold and Silver award holders. And we also actually did in parallel for some computing practitioners at UKI Surrey, which was at Swansea. It was an extensive audit, but it was only what was being shared by those institutions, because it's the public facing web pages, as it says here on this slide. We did kind of explore a bit different keyword searches. The natural ones were being decolonising and computing, but when actually we were realising that this was basically discovering almost nothing that was going on, we had to widen it out to STEM, which was a finding in itself. We were able to employ 3 student researchers to expand the project team. And as a result of that, we did need to have a standardized template for completion. And of course, we went through with some thematic analysis once we got the audit results. I'm going a little bit faster just because I'm really conscious of the time. So from that thematic analysis, we identified 8 emerging themes. Just to say that they were unique, there was also a lot of overlap So it was never really that a institution was only doing one of these activities in the decolonising space. They were often doing many, so they're intertwined. And I'm going to give you a few examples. So in terms of collaboration, yeah, it's very wide, not just staff, but with students and across disciplines and with professional services or with the library or with the student union. Yes, there was papers published as part of scholarship, huge range of resources from as most popular being really a kind of toolkit or a guide. Yes, there were decolonising events, so lots of panel discussions, guest lecturers, talks, and so forth. Not so much on the awards. There was a best practice and a benchmark standard, but that was kind of on the light side. Sometimes there was a physical space within the institutions, kind of like sandpit areas or research centres, studios, and they were called that. Some curriculum development, but sometimes difficult to actually pinpoint this, which perhaps wasn't a surprise because this was on outward-facing public websites. And at strategic level, yes, we did see a mention of decolonising within EDI reports, race equality charters, and at that level. So that was really good. It wasn't just from the bottom up, it was talked about at that strategic point. And one example that we really noticed was the third theme, which was about the creation of resources. There's some links there to various, they're all been checked, they're all working. So for example, at Durham, there's an online hub and a student projects page as part of their Decolonise Durham campaign. And here they've got student interns, including maths. I said it's quite wide, talking about their involvement. While at Exeter, they've got a team of STEM educators, history academics, professional services, and student interns. They've all researched and wrote a report together. Nottingham Trent's doing loads in this space. They've actually got an explaining of what is decolonising by an academic from the University of Cape Town. So some insights from this, you know, a lot of this, of the resource creation was from the ground up, collaborative working parties, often already working in the EDIA space. And student voice is very important, often student initiated, continues to be student led, but also with the student staff partnerships as well. However, what we did see across all of the sector was often these initiatives had started and then just faded away. And that was the kind of most worrying kind of insight that we had gained. And then just a few kind of some of the, again, I like the visuals when I'm doing presentations. So just to show you that University of Oxford here, a team have explored ways to integrate ethical and societal considerations. They're doing ethical hackathons. University of Edinburgh have got a Decolonising the Curriculum podcast series, a session on decolonising your dissertation. At a festival they did a couple of years ago, and then a toolkit, which again was very popular. King's College, they've got a working group, student-led panel, students and staff can ask questions, and so forth. Theme 6, which I was talking about, the physical space. Yeah, Exeter's really good, and this is actually across the southwest as well, which is close to my home because that's where I live and work. And then they have a reflection space to engage and reflect and think about decoloniality and anti-racism, so forth. So yeah, so lots of great examples as well. And the last one, theme 8 strategy, University of Bath, their access and participation plan mentions it specifically, talking about decolonising the curriculum, working together, co-creation. So a range of examples there from the themes that we identified as part of the audit. And just very briefly, part of the work that I do is very important that I integrate students within the projects. And this is a summary of what the student consultant's viewpoint was. in terms of what they saw as well. So this was their own, they wrote a reflective report at the end, saying about often hidden, again, I've emphasized about collaboration, and where the most potential is that projects that are most promising and substantial are where there's collaboration, both within teams and across units and across the university. Okay. So the final part really of our session, I realise I've got very little time, so I'll go super more fast, is our Diverse Computing Pioneers repository. And really this is a response to colleagues saying, that they want to do decolonising work, but they don't have any resources. And given that resources was a very popular outcome from the audit, we thought, okay, let's see what we can do about this. So we did a pilot, and the pilot was built on the fact that we have got awarding gaps, and we were doing work in this area, and we wanted to build a repository of a diverse range of pioneers in computing, which were outside of the traditional US, Europe focus, and therefore looking at lesser known figures. And so that the repository would have figures in there that are inspirational, relatable for all of our students, and they will be freely available in the public space. And there's a link there to it, and there's a link as well in the references, but perhaps, Magnus, you might be able to pop a link into the chat, please, to the repository whilst I'm talking through.
Will do.
A little bit. So for the pilot, we just had the 5 bios. Here they are, from computing, networks, and AI. And we used the classification for the Association for Computing Machinery to give some structure, so it would be easy for computing educators to be able to align their curriculum with if they were signposted into the repository. And then we're really lucky. I put in a bid to CPHC, the Council for Professors and Heads of Computing, a small project bid for £5,000. And that basically funded 2 more student interns, and they were able to then build the repository and expand the list. And we were able to also produce downloadable 3-slide deck. So that was our educational resource. So we now have 24 pioneers. Each pioneer follows the same structure, same kind of background, little bios and images, the downloadable slide deck. And yeah, it's a really good outcome. In addition, I was able to get some internal funding from our access and participation plan. So that also paid for another 2 student interns. So we actually had 4 student interns. And I have to say as well, this was a collaborative project with educators from both Strathclyde and Queen Mary, who we had met at one of the many conferences and workshops that we'd gone to, and we then did this project together. So it was really good. It was really collaborative. So again, putting into practice kind of what we were seeing in the sector. That's what it looks like. That's the landing page. Please do go and have a little look. Our next challenge is to then embed this within our curriculum. Should be straightforward, but for a large organisation like ourselves, which has a very set way of doing things, it's going to have some fun challenges. Not that I will be put off, but that is where we are at the moment. Our tutors really to be using this in an active way when they're engaging with students. And that then nicely leads us to the final session, which probably at this point, given that we've not too bad actually, I went through that very quickly. We might want to open up to having a more wider discussion around some takeaways, our personal reflections and so forth.
Thank you, Zoe and Magnus. I see some hands. Nasser?
Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks actually for, let me just get the right camera actually. Somehow my camera is not connected. Give me a second. Well, I'll leave it with the side camera, don't worry. Thank you very much. I mean, this is fascinating stuff, and thanks for our team who actually organized this. This is very interesting. I have to admit that I have not really been involved in discussions or understanding what is decolonizing the curriculum in STEM before. So it's a good learning experience for me. I have a lot of questions, but I want to keep my questions very brief to allow others to ask. Just a couple of them. The first one is the curricula. When we talk about decolonization in STEM, we don't teach students history. We don't teach them what is colonization period. We don't tell them anything about what happened in the last 2 centuries, or actually what is happening now, because the curricula in the UK are very compact. We just teach them science and engineering. If we're trying to decolonize the curriculum, would it be really obvious to them what we're trying to do? Because they don't understand, many of them. They don't actually probably sometimes get engaged with understanding history and discussing it, understanding colonization, etc. So we're changing things in a subtle way, probably sometimes in a less subtle way. So should be part of decolonizing the curriculum to include in our curriculum some sessions to teach students about history, or to let them analyze history and make them understand colonization. So that's my first question. Before I go, I'll say the other one, which is maybe related, maybe not, and I won't ask any more, but I have too many questions. The modern day colonization is not so obvious either. If we go, for example, to the Africa, which was the most subject to colonization in the last 2 centuries, now it's indirectly being colonized economically, whether by countries from Southeast Asia, I wouldn't mention names, but also from European countries, through exploitation of resources, whether it's natural resources or human resources, etc., but in some other places. And we say that our curriculum is Eurocentric, but the colonization now coming from other places of the world. Are we actually alert to this and making sure that as we go forward, this is actually well embedded again in a decolonized curriculum? Thank you. These are my 2 questions.
Magnus, do you want to go first?
They're fantastic questions. Thank you. And I think we could spend an hour on some of those. My first thoughts about the extent to which STEM subjects, it makes sense to talk from a decolonized point of view. One thing I would say, so within computing specifically, we in our teaching, we talk a lot about socio-technical systems. We talk about the idea that you can't understand any technology without understanding its social, organizational, human interactions, and that it's the system as a whole that is the most relevant thing. And I think if you're going to do that, then quite rapidly you start to look at the colonial aspects or the decolonial aspects of the field. The second thing I would say is that I think in subjects where there is a less obviously social dimension, there is still a massive amount of work to be done in terms of the voices that get heard. So I think that's where the pioneers' work is so important. So even in something like maths, which is a subject that, on the face of it, the history is perhaps less relevant. But if we don't hear from the voices, if we talk about Bertrand Russell and we don't talk about Ramanujan, who worked with Russell at the same time and had an enormous impact upon the field of theoretical mathematics, that you're just losing so much of the depth and wisdom of the field. And so those would be my initial thoughts. Zoe?
Yeah. So you were asking, should we teach history within our, say, computing or wider STEM disciplines? And no, because it kind of sounds like it's a bit of an add-on. So I think if we're going to be brave, got to do much more disruptive work, and we need to be reviewing all of our curriculum with it being woven through, a bit like, you know, when you get a sticker rock, if you go to Brighton or Blackpool and it's got the letters through the middle. The curriculum needs to have that with the decolonising focus in it. Now, I'm not saying that that is easy to achieve, because we're all working within, you know, we're all time poor. But maybe you can, you know, you can set activities to get your students to be involved in that process, because it's not a quick fix for sure. It's going to be definitely, you know, we've been doing this work, or me personally, I don't know, about 4, 5, 6 years now. And, you know, I just said when I finished the talk, now we need to embed it, you know, so that's my next challenge. So I think it won't, and you're right, it won't be obvious to the students, and there will be some pushback as well, because some students want the British way, they want the English education experience. I've heard this from one of the colleagues who was on the last project, who regularly goes to China and teaches TNE students, you know, and it's a challenge because they feel that's not what they've signed up for. So I suppose it's a way of incorporating everybody within that transformation in a way that's sustainable as well. I wasn't quite sure what your second question was, in the sense of, I wrote down, you know, our curriculum is Eurocentric. You're saying that Africa is still being indirectly colonized and being exploited. What could you just kind of rephrase what the question was?
Well, the question is, we're trying to make it less Eurocentric, but the colonization now coming from elsewhere, not in Europe only, and it's progressively increasing. Colonization, maybe not necessarily occupying the countries, but exploiting their resources, using financial pressures or other means, or using sometimes, if you like, using their need by giving them something, but taking them from them a lot more. That is the modern colonization at the moment that is happening across a lot of it across Africa. But more importantly as well, I mean, I don't want to go really extreme in this, but more importantly as well, the way that even the world system is operating now, where you don't need to colonize countries to control them. You can impose sanctions on them.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, of course, would recommend taking a more world view whenever possible. I think that's an important part of the conversation. And I agree with you that, you know, that colonization is continuing in many shapes and formats. It's about how we kind of move forward with the work that we're doing, in terms of something that's actually deliverable. So I suppose I move away from lots of discussion to try to actually take action. And so it's about kind of what's within my power and privilege, within the networks I do, my sphere of influence, to make some change. If that means that you've got an interest in that, then bring it on, basically do it. Yeah, widen out the conversation with those that where you can make the change.
Thank you.
Noor, you have a question?
Yes, first of all, thank you, Magnus and Zoe, and as well, Mustafa, I think, in the chat has been very interactive. So thank you all. I wanted, I have two questions, but very related as well. You mentioned that there were many initiatives in many universities in decolonizing the curriculum, and they didn't continue. So do you know why? And actually, continuing from the conversation that Nasser started of teaching history or not, I have a feeling that in STEM specifically as a area that we have a deeper issue in that we do not raise, or we find raising colonization in our curriculum as a risk. It's a professional risk. So my question is this a taboo as well, which exists in STEM specifically? So for example, in computing, we teach cybersecurity, and so we teach the technologies. Many of the companies that develop these technologies participate in colonization in different forms, but we focus just on teaching the technologies, the systems. So why does the taboo exist in STEM specifically, and do we need to change and dismantle the culture in itself? So
okay,
yeah.
I'll take the first one because that was the project that I led on about the audit of so you're asking about the initiatives that we saw that are kind of stopped, and yeah, unfortunately I don't have the answer to that, but I imagine that following the Black Lives Matter and the public interest, that then translated to universities saying we should be doing something around this area. Let's put loads of resource, let's have it in our strategies, let's EDI, access and participation plans, and so forth. And so there was a kind of concerted effort to doing that work. But, you know, that's changed, hasn't it, in the last couple of years? You know, what's happened in America with a new president there and how they've scaled that back. You know, we're seeing change in politics here in the UK as well. I don't know about your university, but we're all under kind of cost-saving measures. So this work that started with a really, you know, with earnest, has now kind of just seems to have faded away. And but I don't have the answers to why has it stopped. I'm just kind of thinking that's probably the case of some external events that are driving it, you know. And we're now all about we're all about being, I say saving money, but being efficient. You know, it is about cost savings. We are losing staff. We are having to do more in less time. And then decolonising, which Mustafa's mentioned about getting it converted or conflated into EDI work, it gets squeezed. And the two projects I've talked about, I was able to access funds to get students to help us move forward with the work. And that's, you know, if there isn't funds available, you know, I've still got to do my core job, and this bit isn't seen as being a core part of my job. You know, so this is something that I'm personally to take forward. Magnus, do you want to do the bit about teaching history or not? Why I find it a risk, and is it a taboo?
I think that's such an interesting question. I'm trying to decide how cynical to be. I mean, I think you could argue it from a kind of economic interests point of view, couldn't you? That it's a taboo because a lot of STEM subjects are deeply entangled with, you know, Western capitalism, essentially. And what's the phrase of bell hooks about white supremacist patriarchal capitalism? There's another couple of words. And STEM subjects for a long time have been entangled with that, and it's not convenient for people who have the power for those things to be questioned. I think at some level it's got a lot to do with that. I think you're right. It isn't a safe thing to be asking some of these questions in some contexts.
Yeah.
And
we do a lot of, EDI related work in the sense of professional development all around this whole area about unconscious bias, about labeling, about inclusive language, about anti-racist practice. And time again, often the colleagues that come to this, they are nervous about saying the wrong thing, about doing the wrong thing, about causing offence. And that's the ones who've signed up to come to a training session, you know, which is the minority of colleagues. So there are a lot of colleagues as well that don't actually come to those sessions because they will be saying, and I've heard this, well, I'm not racist. I work for an open, inclusive organisation. So I think the point about positionality and thinking about your own biases is a really good starting point for these kind of discussions as well.
Nadine has a question. Nadine?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the insightful talk. Actually, my question is nicely follow on your point, Zoe. The repository that you have created, to what extent you get a lot of buy-in, and to what extent you measured impact? How many people actually end up using it? So this is very good, and I think it's good to use it. And we are very active in CDAPs. We want to create these resources, but to what extent we can audit it? We can measure how many lecturers are adapting, buying in. Would be good to know more about what happened at your end so we can imagine what will happen in our case.
Yeah, well, we don't have any metrics, I'm afraid. Even getting a simple kind of counter for the number of clicks on the site has proved problematic. So we don't even have that analytical data at the moment. I do know the colleagues who are part of the project team have both used it within their practice, within their curriculum. I've got some examples there. We have a new module that's launched. We've got a student intern talking in a video about referring to the repository. But yeah, that's where we are at the moment, is actually now saying, like, we want you to actually use this. So events like this are great because obviously we're able to spread the word. So the dissemination is a really important part of any project. And did an event yesterday with colleagues in another part of the university and showcased it there. But yeah, you know, it's ongoing, isn't it? When you do something and then you want others to use it. I mean, the best thing is that it is freely available, you know, so you can go there and you don't need to pay anything. But getting the message out is always difficult, I suppose, because again, not a core part of my job, but it feels a waste to have it sitting on a shelf, especially now that we've got the downloadable 3-slide deck as well, which is perfect. So we'll be looking, our next kind of project will be looking to embed, but also perhaps to expand. So we realize we have some limitations. For example, most of the pioneers are able-bodied. We're not really representing any of the LGBTQ+ community. I think I left out a letter there, apologies. We're not also representing anybody who might be neurodiverse. You know, so although we aimed to be lesser known, we still have made some omissions. So that again would be something else, and it might appeal then to a bigger group of people.
Thank you so much. It seems that we are out of time. Perhaps Zoe and Magnus, you can come again soon to talk to us about your the impact of your efforts to embed this work into your curricula. I would like to thank our two presenters for their insightful presentation, and I really enjoyed the lively conversation afterwards. Thank you to everybody. And have a good weekend, a long weekend.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's been lovely.